Okay, next on our agenda is an interesting. It's interesting. The name of our association is the Old Astoria Neighborhood Association, and I often get calls that even though the name refers to a geographic area, it also has a time element to it. And often we get calls from people asking about the history of certain areas, certain buildings. Just this last weekend, I was helping out on a walking tour of the whole neighborhood with another group from Manhattan. And, there's a lot of history here. Our buildings are for the United States are very old. The building I live in is over 100 years old. And in our neighborhood, I know there's buildings going back to the early 1800s. So with that, I'm very pleased to invite an old friend of ours, Richard Melnick, who's an author. And Richard he served in the United States Army. I'm reading his bio as an airborne infantryman in Hess, West Virginia, and in 7 U.S. states, achieving the rank of Staff Sergeant. Former president of the Greater Astoria Historical Society. And he's a licensed New York State sightseeing guide. Yes, okay. And Richard he works as a night doorman in New York City, and in days he's working on history subjects. So he just recently finished a new book. If we can have here it is, Long Island City in 1776, a snapshot in time. So the revolution comes to Queens. We have a very long history here, like I said. So Richard, if you'd like to join us, that would be great.
Yes, sir.
How you doing?
Hello, good evening. Thank you, Richard, and Old Astoria Neighborhood Association for allowing me to speak tonight.
Mm-hmm. Good. So would you like to, I guess, start this with a little idea of why you wanted to write this book about a particular year, a particular time, in a particular place, and what was your inspiration?
Okay, I had been on the board with the Greater Astoria Historical Society from 2003 to 2018. And like you said, I had been a sightseeing guide up until 2018. What I wanted to do was, formerly I was a jack of all trades, master of none, meaning I loved all history. I could watch something on Egypt and then as easily watch something about World War I. And as I'm getting a little older, I had realized about 10 years ago that I need to focus on something tangible and maybe write a book about something. So I did a lot of local research, and having been with the Greater Astoria Historical, I had been able to touch upon many facets of our local history dating back to the 1630s. So I chose the American Revolution because a lot of it happened right here during the peak year of the Revolution in New York, 1776. So that's why I chose that subject for my book.
Yeah, great. If you'd like to give like a brief little overview of the book and what its progression of some of the main topics that you address. Sure.
Well, in the book, in the earlier parts, I state that 1775 was Boston. A lot of things happened in New England to start the revolution off. Then, as in April of 1776, the war shifted from the British evacuated Boston, went to Halifax, Nova Scotia to regroup. Then they came to New York to invade, to take New York City from the Americans. In August of 1776 was the famous Battle of Long Island, also referred to as the Battle of Brooklyn. And the Americans were trounced in the largest battle of the Revolution on the Brooklyn Heights. And then after that battle, the Hessians, who were German mercenaries that served with the British and the Hessians swept into what is now Long Island City. And after the Patriots, the Whigs, the Americans fled the local area. All of Long Island City and all of Queens, for that matter, and Kings County, which is now the borough of Brooklyn, and Manhattan were occupied by the British for 7 long years. So all of those things happened right here in our neighborhood, and some of those sites and roadways still exist to be found by people that are inquiring.
Good, good. Okay, we have some questions actually that were brought to us by
Very good.
Let me see. The first one is, why the title Long Island City? Long Island City didn't exist until 1870.
Okay. Well, I brought Long Island City into the modern age. Long Island City as an incorporated city and as a political entity lasted from 1870 to 1898. Then, with the great consolidation of the 5 boroughs in 1898 to create the city of New York, Long Island City as an incorporated entity fell away, and it became only a part of a section in the borough of Queens. But with the Greater Astoria Historical Society, they had written a few books with my help, but I was never the lead author, so that's why I did this book. But Long Island City is 11 square miles, and that covers Sunnyside, Hunters Point, Blissville, Astoria, Ravenswood, Steinway. So all of those hamlets and neighborhoods became Long Island City, and that was our, with the Greater Astoria Historical and myself, that was our area of focus. The 11 square miles of Long Island City, including the surrounding waterways of Newtown Creek, the East River, and the Hell Gate up around to Bowery Bay, where Rikers Island is, and the inland border areas that include Woodside and East Elmhurst. So that is the focus area of the book.
Good. Okay, can you explain to the audience who the Tories were and who the Whigs were? And also, why are there 2 different spellings for the Hallett family? Hallett's with 1 T and Hallett's with 2 T's.
Okay, first off, the Halletts, the family spelling had 2 T's at the end. But now modern spellings, and a lot of different places have done this too. They've dropped the second T in Hallett. So Hallett's Cove Playground, Hallett's Point Playground, and even the Hallett's Cove condo on Hallett's Point, they've all reduced it to 1 T. And it's funny that some places use an apostrophe S and some places use just an S. So the apostrophe usage is sporadic. And I don't think there's any written rule on how to refer to it. The people that created the parks or the buildings can name it as they wish. As per Tories, the British, the supporters of the British Crown and Parliament and Empire were called Tories. And today, in the United Kingdom, the Tories are one of the 2 major political parties. They were also referred to as loyalists and royalists. So many people that were British supporters when the British Army and the Hessians came into the area, they were very happy to see the British here. So the Tories and the loyalists would report on the Whigs and the Continentals and the Patriots, who were the American supporters. So that's the difference. It was the Tories versus the Whigs, the Loyalists versus the Patriots. So anyone who stayed here who was a patriot was either imprisoned or they were made to sign an oath of loyalty to the British Crown in order to remain here in Western Queens, which was part of the town of Newtown at that time.
further along that, you said 7 years was the time period the British occupied Queens. Was there any kind of organized guerrilla warfare? Was there anything going on to make their stay more difficult?
Well, after the Battle of Long Island in August of 1776, and after the British and Hessians swept into Western Queens and occupied all of Queens for that matter, the British and Hessians massed on Newtown Creek, and they 4,000 troops strong in the first wave invaded Manhattan Island, which was called New York Island or York Island at that time, on September 15th, 1776. And they invaded New York Island. Washington and his army had to flee north. And by November of 1776, there were no Americans or patriots on Manhattan Island or in Queens County or in Kings County. So the area was fully occupied from, say, August, September of 1776 until the Peace of Paris was signed in 1783, and the British didn't evacuate New York City until November of 1783. And as to your question, the area was fully occupied, and there were up to 36,000 British troops rotating in and out of New York City and Queens to fight elsewhere. So no, there was no guerrilla warfare here. This area was completely British, completely Tory for 7 full years.
Another question. We understand the burnings of Vernon Boulevard were aligned with the colonialists. And who exactly was Vernon?
Well, there were two Vernon brothers. I don't remember their first names. They were from Rhode Island. They lived in, I think they lived in Newport, Rhode Island. And after the 1773 Boston Tea Party, Ebenezer Stevens, who took part in the Boston Tea Party, had to flee Boston, and he was harbored by the Vernons on Rhode Island. Ebenezer Stevens, who ended up being a commander of artillery at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 and served up until the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, he later lived in Astoria from 1797 until his death in 1823. And then General Stevens was instrumental in naming some of the local streets. And the main avenue along the East River throughout the full length of Long Island City from Newtown Creek all the way up to Old Bowery Road, which is about near where the Paletti Power Plant is now, was named Vernon Avenue and then Vernon Boulevard in modern times. So Vernon will be discussed in my second book, which will come out in 2 to 3 years to bring us into the modern age, from the Revolution to the modern age.
Ah, interesting. Good. What other interesting facts? I know that it's not part of this book, but I know that while we have a ferry now, for quite a while there was a ferry on Hallett's Peninsula, ferry terminal. What do you know about that?
Yeah, and back in 1753, Jacob Blackwell, who Blackwell's Island is named after, now that's Roosevelt Island, and I think one other famous local citizen whose name is escaping me, they opened a tidal grist mill and a ferry in the 1750s at Hallett's Cove. Then when the British occupied the area, the ferry was in full use, shipping troops to and from Manhattan Island back and forth to Queens. Also, during the Revolution, there was a tidal grist mill on the Sunswick Creek, right about where Socrates Sculpture Park is now. There was a causeway which allowed tidal water to come in and flood a tidal pond to the east of Vernon Boulevard. and the tidal grist mill was right in that area, and it was very heavily used by the British and Hessians to feed all the occupying troops. There were also tidal grist mills on the Dutch Kills, which came off of Newtown Creek, and around the top of Long Island City in Bowery Bay, where Jackson Mill Creek and where LaGuardia Airport is now. So tidal grist mills were very important to feeding a large occupying force. I just wanted to add that I have some credibility in this matter, not only being a seasoned historian with the Greater Astoria Historical, but I was in the Army in West Germany, and I was stationed in the state of Hessen for 3 years on a post where I trained on a post where Hessian soldiers trained with for the British to fight in the American Revolution. And conversely, Hessian troops were stationed in the future Long Island City, right in areas where we all live in this area. And I've also kayaked on the East River about 40 times, and I've kayaked through the Hell Gate 10 times. So that gave me river cred in terms of being able to discuss British warships on the East River and through the Hell Gate. So essentially, this book was right down my alley because there are 3 facets to my life which enable me to write well about this topic.
Good. Well, great. I got 2 other questions, and they're a little off topic on the book, but they're sort of folk tales for Astoria. Number 1, what's the story behind the tunnels from the houses on 12th Street going to the river in the basements? I have seen one of them myself, so I know they exist. That's one question. And number 2, we've heard the story about John Jacob Astor and how the area is named after him, and it had something to do with St. George's Episcopal Church. I wondered if you could go over that a little bit for our listeners.
Okay, in terms of John Jacob Astor, he was the wealthiest man in New York City in the 1830s, 20s, 30s, 40s. I think he died in 1848. I'm not sure on that. Stephen Halsey, who is considered the father of Astoria, he petitioned John Jacob Astor. He asked him for $2,000 to form a township to be named after him called Astoria. And John Jacob Astor gave Stephen Halsey only $500, and he named it after him anyway. And at the Greater Astoria, we believe that we're pretty sure that John Jacob Astor never set foot in his namesake town of Astoria. And there's also an Astoria, Oregon, which was founded as far back as 1811 as a beaver pelt and an animal pelt trading post on the Pacific. So there was an Astoria, Oregon, and an Astoria in Queens. And what was the other question?
The tunnels from 12th Street to the river.
Oh, yeah. On 12th Street, the corner of 12th Street and 27th Avenue, there was a house supposedly with tunnels that came out behind the house. One of my historian colleagues had said some of the tunnels were probably used for bringing in goods and supplies into the house, so the occupants of the wealthy occupants of some of the houses would not have to see or deal with the servants or the people bringing in the materials. Also, there are some stories about some of the tunnels being part of the Underground Railroad for slaves, for slaves to escape and for slaves to come here and be free. But I'm waiting for another historian to nail that down for us and myself, because I've not found solid concrete evidence as to that. But it would be interesting for a younger, more motivated historian to find that out for myself and for all of Astoria.
And I know that I've been in that house, and I have actually in the basement seen the entrance to those tunnels. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
one day you'll get me into that house and I'll take a look. Thank you.
if it ends up for sale. Anyways, listen, thank you so much. It's great to have your presentation. And everyone, why don't you mention how people can get a copy of the book? Okay. And we hope this is the first of many. And
Yes,
also, in the private chat, please put down anything that you may have in terms of helping people to access the book, and we'll put it on the screen.
understood. The book was a labor of love. It kicked my butt, but I ended up, after 5.5 years, it came out. It's available on Amazon and through the History Press and through Arcadia Publishing. It should be on sale in Barnes & Noble, and I'll be doing a couple of talks, which I'll mention on the chat page. And once again, thank you, Richard, for a fine interview.
Okay, thank you. From one Richard to another. Okay, thank you.